Welcome to the Ed Puzzle on Chapter 33, An American Pageant. This is looking at the causes of the Great Depression and the Great Depression itself. So here we go. Right, so we finished the 1920s, and one of the things that I've tried to focus on in the 1920s is talking about the idea that the Great Depression doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not like we get through the 1920s and everything's awesome, and then we get to the 1930s and we get to 1929 and we're like, oh, that didn't work out. That's not where we're going with that at all. We're looking at the fact that in the 1920s there are a lot of things going on and trends happening and these long-term causes of the Great Depression that sort of come to a head and culminate after the stock market crash at 1929 and the snowball really starts rolling. So that's one of the things that we want to focus on, or what are these long-term causes? What's been going on that allows the Great Depression to happen as we're aware of it? And then we'll look to how the government works to solve the Great Depression. So our long-term causes, lack of profit in key industries. So, oops, I'm sorry, I need to pull my pen up. Let's pull my pen up. Here we go. All right, so lack of profit in key industries. Railroads, textiles, steel, they're actually all declining in the 1920s, or staying status quo rather than increasing. Interestingly enough, the housing market, which begins falling in the 1920s, happens. But a lot of times with economic downturns, it takes a while for them to really be noticed on a national scale. And when you see the housing market starting to fall, when people aren't willing to make large purchases, which your house is going to be the biggest thing you'll ever work to purchase in your life, that shows that people aren't confident in the economy. And our economy is based on people spending. We need you to believe that you're going to continue to have a steady income so that you're willing to make those big purchases that are going to be paid off over time. And if the housing market is falling, if we don't need new houses built, that affects so many other industries in and of itself. Now, what's really interesting is the last time what's called as the economic bubble bursting happened in 2008. And again, the key indicator in that was that the housing market began to massively decline. And I'm not saying that people's panic causes economic recessions. It's certainly a factor to it. People panic, they think the economy is doing badly, they stop spending. Because they stop spending, less jobs are created. It affects everything. We need Americans to go out and buy things on actual currency, not credit. Farmers were really hit hard. So during World War I, things were going well because they were growing crops not only for America, but the other allies as well. And the war ends, and there is a period of time where we are helping out the other nations by looking at growing more food and that sort of thing because they were so just devastated by war. But then we end up having a large amount of surplus because farmers don't decrease the amount of crops that they're growing. And because the market is flooded with their food crops, that's like kind of the same word, with their food stuffs, food things, food, it leads to the products being worth less, not worthless, period, but not worth as much. And so farmers are not getting what they used to for their crops. They can't pay their bills. They begin to lose farms. So the farming sector has the problems that we saw when we talked about farming problems within the populist movement. Think of the little populist game that we played and the difficulty you had there. Consumers begin to spend less. And I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, because they have less confidence. So if we look at it, and you believe that your job is on the line, that it might not be around, you're not going to go to the movies. You're going to make those extra purchases. When I go to the grocery store, I'm going to buy only what I need, not little extras. I'm not going to be buying extra clothing. I'm not going to be doing all this other stuff. Well, when you stop doing that, you really are creating a less of a demand for those those other products or services, and then those people are losing those jobs because people don't need them. So your lack of spending is creating less jobs or causing less jobs rather than creating more jobs. Living on credit. People are using the credit card, well, not credit cards that haven't been invented, but they're using credit that you can get at stores rather than paying for it in cash. And then here's the bad thing. They're getting loans from the bank or loans from other places and not paying those loans back. So that means that those places have less money to loan. Uneven distribution of income. In the 1920s, the economic policies of the 1920s, as run by the 1920s Republican-led government in the 1920s, it caused the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. Wealth, the lack of regulation on businesses, and the idea that these businesses, because they were paying less taxes, because they were having less regulation, that out of the goodness of their hearts, the businesses would increase the wages of their employees. That doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. They increase the wages for themselves, but you're not seeing that occur. What later on will be referred to in the 80s as a trickle-down theory. Wealth isn't trickling down. It's not even trickling. It's just pooling among the wealthy. But the poor want to live like the Joneses, so they're buying things on credit. I want to keep up with my neighbors. I want to have the things they're having, but they can't afford them. And pretty soon, you got to pay the piper. I often like to refer to the 1920s as people in your 20s. In your 20s, it is all about that taste of freedom. I'm not with mom and dad anymore. I'm out at college, or I'm first entering the workforce, and I am having a hootenanny of a good time. I get credit cards. Why? Because they were offered to me, and it's like free money. Hey, entire dorm, everybody want pizza? We're having a party. And at some point, as you get to your late 20s and you start entering into, actual adulthood, and mom and dad aren't going to bail you out anymore, you have to reap what you sow. And you have to pay the consequences of perhaps those unsound financial choices you made in your younger years. You realize that your credit score kind of matters, and that 450 you're rocking or that 500 is not good. And the U.S. was the same way. We lifted up in the 1920s. Woo, woo, let's all dance the Charleston. Come on, party, party, party. And then the 30s came, and we had gotten older and kind of wiser, and we realized we had made some very poor financial decisions, and we got it sorted out, but it took some time. We had to learn our lessons. The election of 1928 is between Herbert Hoover, the Republican, and Alfred Smith, the Democrat. Hoover wins. Why? Because on face value, the Republicans were having a string of awesomeness. They were enjoying the 20s. Businesses certainly supported that. Sorry. So the stock market. I will do a job in class of explaining the stock market better than I'm going to be able to do in a not face-to-face setting. If you already understand the stock market, then your economics teacher has done a phenomenal job, and you are ahead of basically every other American. So in 1929, the economists were saying that the bull market, this period of can the stock rise any higher? Yes, it can. They thought things were awesome. The Dow Jones Industrial Average tells you, is an indicator of the health of the economy. As long as that arrow is green and things are going up, or if there's a dip, there's a quick recovery, we're doing fine as an economy. People look at that, businesses look at that to sort of see where we're growing. And in the late 1920s, economists began saying, you know what? We probably want to keep an eye on this. We probably want to watch this. I don't think things are doing as well as they are. You might want to watch how much stock you're buying. You might want to keep an eye on things. But people were doing what's called buying on margin and speculation. That means when you go to buy stock, you are getting a loan to buy that stock, and then you plan to pay that loan back on how much money your stock makes. You're making a gamble that the business you're investing in is going to do well. And that's awesome, as long as the business does well. But the problem is, people buying on margin were finding out that the businesses weren't always successful, and they weren't able to pay the banks back. The banks, therefore, didn't have the money to lend other people, and the banks couldn't pay their bills. And that's not good. Black Tuesday October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashes. Now, you know I'm not a big dates person. I don't like memorizing of dates. But this is one date you need to know. If someone says October 29th, 1929 to them, you should shout back at them Black Tuesday. And they should shout back at you, stock market crashes. And then you should jump up with glee and then talk about, not that the stock market crashed, but because you both know the information and what that means. So it's a massive fall in prices of stock on one date. And then there's actually a quick recovery after that of the stock market, but it is considered the short-term cause of the Great Depression. If this first slide is your long-term causes, and it is, this is your short-term cause, the imminent event that causes the Great Depression. Now, that doesn't mean that the stock market crashes on October 29th and in October 30th, everyone's like, man, this Great Depression is horrible. It's a period of time. It's a period of time. It's just the snowball that gets going. It's this event combined with all those long-term causes that after a period of a few years just keeps things just keep getting worse. Your dates for the Great Depression are 1929 to 1940. It is World War II that ends the Great Depression in the United States. I'm going to say that again. It is World War II that ends the Great Depression in the United States. And for the third time, because somebody's going to tell me it's the New Deal on a test, it is World War II that ends the Great Depression in the United States. I'm not downplaying what the New Deal does. I am saying that it alone doesn't solve the problems. All right, again, this is a short thing of the causes of the Great Depression. We're looking at tariffs and war debts. We're not necessarily getting paid back the war debts that Europe owes us. Look at the unsuccessful Dawes Plan. They're high tariffs. The U.S. enacts the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which is the highest tariff at that point ever. But when you enact a tariff on another country is going to respond with, fine, then I'm going to put a tariff on you. Tariffs were causing problems. Availability of easy credit, buying on margin, unequal distribution of income, problems in the farming sector, all issues. So Herbert Hoover is the president after the stock market crashes, and he says, wow, things are starting to look economically not okay. Right? He's in his first, entering in his second year, and by the mid-1930s, 1931, the economy is just not recovering. Banks are starting to collapse. I feel like I'm yelling at you and being really loud unnecessarily. Banks are starting to collapse, and that's causing economic problems just throughout. It's a few people losing their job, then it's a few more, then it keeps going. And so Herbert Hoover really believed in laissez-faire. He really believed in government handouts. We're talking at a time when the government, prior to the New Deal, had not been involved in your economic well-being. You can't afford to feed your kids. That's unfortunate for you. Better hope a private charity, Salvation Army, a church, religious organization is going to help you out. But the government's not responsible for fixing your financial woes. That's not the government's job. That's your job. You fix it. You work 6 jobs. You do whatever it is. Don't expect the government to bail you out because you're having financial problems. That's not the function of a government, at least as it was believed prior to the New Deal and and promoted by Hoover. Hoover just really was afraid of what's going to happen. It's this slippery slope. What's going to happen if the government does this for you? If the government fixes all your problems, when might the problem really become to be the government? And so he promotes this concept known as rugged individualism. And he feels like that's what makes us American. That people, when things get hard, Americans dig in and you find a solution on your own 2 feet. You work and you make it happen. You do it, not the government bailing you out. And so he promoted rugged individualism, and he felt like that private charities and local government should deal with it, not the national government. He believed that over time, government handouts would make people dependent on the government. It would take away the American worth ethic, or this Puritan worth ethic. I don't know why I can't say that word, that we would continue to talk about. That over time, people aren't going to want to work. The government will just do it. But the government depends on people working to pay for those that are not working. And he just feared that would occur. And he just felt like it wasn't American. Now, that being said, he did believe that there might be some minor things other than direct handouts that could work. So he meets with the heads of business and banking and labor and says, you guys need to work together and come up with a solution. You do stuff business-wise that's going to help. And the businesses said, it's not in our best interest. If I hire more people, my business is going to collapse. If we pay people more, I can't afford to have my business. I need to protect those employees that I have right now. I just can't invest. I'm not comfortable. And so in the 1930 midterm elections, looking at your House of Representatives and Congress, Democrats win big time. And when that happens, and this often happens in midterms, the power of the parties will switch. It shows that the public really doesn't have confidence in what Hoover's doing. They don't have faith in him. They don't have faith in the Republicans. So the Federal Home Loan Banking Act is put out by Herbert Hoover in 1932. It lowers mortgage rates for homeowners, doesn't take them away, you still got to pay it, and allows farmers to go to the banks and refinance their loans in order to avoid foreclosure. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or the RFC, comes out in 1932, and that authorizes up to $2 billion in emergency financing for banks in other countries. Banks and other companies. He believed that that would have a trickle-down effect on the rest of the economy, and it just doesn't. So the bonus army is made up of 10 to 20,000 World War I veterans. And what had happened is there's something called the Patman's Bill, and the Patman's Bill had said that the government would give World War I veterans a bonus for their service in the war, and that this bonus, it didn't really necessarily give a date to be paid. So the World War I veterans are like, hey, we need this money now. And so there's this march on Washington, and about 10 to 20,000 World War I veterans, you set up camp outside the White House, demanding that the Senate pass the Patman's Bill and give them the money now. Well, that doesn't happen. The Senate decides not to do it, basically because they say the government just didn't have the money because they weren't having the tax revenue to do so. And some people leave dejectedly, but about 2,000 or so men refuse to leave, and they set up camp outside the White House, and they say, Hoover, we're not going till you make it happen. Make it happen. Do it. Fix it. Well, Hoover says, ugh, now I don't want to do that. He authorizes the U.S. military to clear the army out, and they do so very, very violently. Now, if you are a president and you want to get reelected, having it published across the national newspapers that you violently attacked veterans does not go well. And it didn't go well for Hoover. The election of 1932, Hoover goes against Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, well known in New York, and he wins big time, like landslide, sticking it to you big time. He's elected in November, but he will not take office until March of 1933, because that's when presidents took office. And so he forms what's known as the Brain Trust. And Franklin Roosevelt says, listen, I want to go in guns a-blazing. I want to go in ready. And there's so much time that we could be working on a plan. So this Brain Trust is made up of professors, lawyers, policy experts, and their job is to help him create a plan that can be used to help the nation get back on its feet. What is the answer to the economic problem that we're in? How do we solve it? What Hoover was doing or not doing clearly didn't work. How do we address this issue? How do we fix it? And we're going to look at the presidency of FDR later on But right now we're going to go back and look at the effect and the issues within the Great Depression itself and the effect of the Depression itself. I'm going to end the notes right here, and that's where I will pick up on your next Edpuzzle. Make sure you're reading, make sure you're taking notes on the Edpuzzle.